always be very clear, like it is already replacing human jobs. If you are a graphic artist, for example, there are plenty of AI applications now that you can throw a prompt into and get an image just exactly what you're looking for, or close enough that you don't have to hire a human to do it. I think many of the news articles that we click on a daily basis, particularly from social media, have either complete or significant part a hand in it of AI generation. So, you know, if you work in journalism, which was already taking a big hit because of the internet, then this is just, you know, another body blow to the world of journalism.
Yes and no. Again, there's always two sides to these things. The word computer, which we're used to using very casually and everywhere, a computer originally was a human being. They were people employed to calculate the tides and naval tables to get accurate transport. Now that was taken over. The history of computing was about trying to find ways to improve the efficiency of these things. So obviously the people who did these jobs were replaced by computers once digital computing became a norm. But it hasn't, in that sense, damaged human capacity to employ themselves. More jobs have actually been created around these industries. And I suspect, though one cannot accurately predict, I suspect that the same will apply in this technology as well. Other jobs will appear.
Now, there are two ways of looking at that. You can take a kind of glass is half full or a glass is half empty approach. The glass is half full says that, look, whenever technology comes in, it displaces some jobs and creates others. So the stat that's often thrown around, if you go back, I think even 100 years, something like 20%, if that's the figure, something of that order, of people worldwide worked in agriculture. Now it's only about 8%. Why? Because mechanization and improved processes and all these things mean we need less manual workers out in the fields. We can use a combine harvester to cut our grain. We don't go out and harvest it by hand with a scythe. And most people would go, that's a good example of where technology has helped. Now, that doesn't mean there's loads of people unemployed. It means the people who had previously been working, perhaps, you know, harvesting grain by hand, are now doing all kinds of other jobs. So there could be a sense in which what AI does is reorganize the workplace rather than just see mass unemployment. The glass is half full says, well, hang on a minute, AI is quite a different animal. You know, right now we're talking about AI, artificial intelligence. A lot of tech companies and those in the field are aiming at what we would call artificial general intelligence, AGI. And artificial general intelligence is a system, a machine that basically can do anything that a human can do using their brain and do it faster and better and more efficiently. And we've never lived in that world before. So it could be massively more disruptive. And so the danger is, yes, could that cause vast amounts of unemployment?
From a Muslim perspective, there's still Islam still has authority, and Muslims still looked very closely to their texts and to God for guidance, and that can't be replaced. A Muslim is someone that submits to God, and that can't be replaced with some kind of other moral authority. In fact, Muslims feel very they don't. I think that the decline in if you like the church and so on has created this kind of vacuum where morality becomes very subjective and very open to kind of debate. And as Muslims, we have very, very clear guidance on morality that we or may not always live up to, but we always return back to that guidance. So we aren't. There isn't that, in a sense, that confusion that you might have if you don't have that religious kind of grounding.
Well, that's a tricky one. I mean, in terms of moral authority, I guess my response to that would be, could it do a worse job than how we as a society have been doing it so far? I think in very, very general terms, we as a society navigate towards a more moral and just society. And I think that's obviously very country dependent and also dependent on many opinions, right? But we are in many ways, should we say, suffering from the hangover of overly dictatorial, should we say, religious moral guidings in the past. I think we're getting past that in many countries now. So in terms of where we get our moral guidance from, I'm quite glad that it's less and less coming from a religious perspective, or at least organized religion, and we're moving towards a more humanistic social environment, right? So if we sort of embed AI into that process, again, part of our mission in Glasgow Skeptics is to try and find the truth more accurately and more consistently than otherwise. I think AI can help you do that. If you're asking it the right questions, if the AI system you're using has appropriate kind of ethical parameters laid into it, then I think your path towards being able to make accurate, well-informed decisions about how the world works is probably increased. But of course, the biases that many large language models have inherited, because essentially they're scouring information on the internet, and in case you haven't looked recently, the internet's kind of a messy place, right? So a lot of those cultural biases and a lot of the misinformation that's online may be sort of repeated back, unwittingly by an AI.
In a simple word, no, I don't think you can trust AI as a source of moral authority, largely because AI really in many ways is a great big mirror. It's a reflection of humanity. It reflects the best of us. It reflects the worst of us. I mean, the internet did this beforehand, but AI even more so. So in one sense, the danger with assuming that AI could itself be a source of moral authority is really you're just talking to yourself. And it's always very important when you're using an AI platform, whether it's ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, one of those well-known chatbots. It's always important to remind yourself you are effectively just talking to lots of synthesized human voices. So what you're not getting is that balanced, neutral view from outside. And as I say, because humans have this complex nature, we can be both good and evil. We can be both incredibly generous, we can be incredibly mean. Any of us who reflected on our own nature know that we have that split within us. Trusting that AI, which just magnifies that to the 100th degree to be a source of moral wisdom, is a huge, huge concern, I think. And as a Christian, I would say ultimately, the problem you run into going this route is that any human moral system, any moral system that thinks that you can get to morality, just by argument, just by philosophy, just by clever arguments, ultimately doesn't work. Whichever route you go, you ultimately end up either saying that we let individuals make up morality for themselves, or you defer to some big entity like the state. But either way, whenever you're faced with somebody making moral judgments, as an individual, you can still go, yeah, says who? What's your authority for that? And unless you have some sort of transcendent source of morality underpinning your thinking, you're going to get into trouble. Absolutely, there's going to be some kind of need to build values into AI. In fact, there is one of the oldest problems in artificial intelligence theory is what's known as the value loading problem. How do you build values into AI? And it was best illustrated actually by a very famous thought experiment, very simple thought experiment, first described by a gentleman called Nick Bostrom, who's a professor at Oxford, AI expert, and he gave what he has come to be known as the paperclip example illustration. And the thought experiment goes like this. Let's imagine we get an artificial general intelligence that can do anything a human can do with great speed and power, and we give it a very simple task. We say, your task is just to make paperclips. What could possibly go wrong? We're not asking it to run armies or set economic policy, just make paperclips. But if we neglect to tell our AI that you cannot use human beings as a raw material for paperclips, within 2 or 3 years, the entire planet Earth has become nothing more than a paperclip factory. Every human being has been boiled down to our atoms to make paperclips. Every bit of power and resource on the planet directed to making nothing more than paperclips, because somebody forgot to tell the AI that paperclip's not the end of the world. And Nick said that simple thought experiment shows you why you have got to load values into AI.
There are, in fact, we did it because I consulted a friend on some of these questions, and he did an AI search, and what he got the AI to do was 5 principles that religions do agree upon, such as the golden rule, do as your brother as you would have done to yourself, and other kind of key principles in compassion and justice, key principles that any religion and even non-religion would agree upon in a general sense. But then, of course, how does that play out in detail and in practice? That requires a lot more kind of thought. But there are common principles that an upright, moral individual, religious or non-religious, would probably agree upon.
Like, as a general guidance, don't kill people, don't steal stuff is pretty simple, right? So you can probably instill things like the golden rule in there, and some basic sort of low-hanging fruit, right? Otherwise, again, like, as long as there's an imperative within the AI to provide accurate, well-referenced, preferably unbiased information, then it's certainly a step in the right direction. And I think it's worth mentioning as well, like I've already touched on, like some of the biases that any sort of large language model may pick up from what it's scoured from the internet. I think any AI system that we look to for any kind of moral or factual judgment or guidance, we should be encouraging those systems to project the view of a society the way we would like it to be, rather than the way it currently is, right? And let's just take a simple example of that, right? If you go and do a Google search right now using the word doctor, you're mostly going to get or a picture of a doctor. You'll mostly get male results there. More often than not, depending on where you're searching from, you'll get white-skinned doctors as well. And that's just because of the biases of the internet and the way that the job market has gone over the years. Now that's changing, right? So do we want our AI to reflect life as it is right now, or do we want it to reflect a more idealistic and humanistic society? I would say yes.